The Tag on the Key. Book 1, The Plan. Chapter 10, Six-Day War. My father and mother loved Israel and Israelis. They took a trip to Israel in 1966 and came back highly inspired. We were always active in the efforts to free the Jews of the Soviet Union. My mother was for many years the main fundraiser for Israel bonds in our area. She received many awards and honors for her work, but always shrugged it off as something she just had to do. She was doing it for herself. The world stood idly by, watching, as the Jews of Europe were annihilated. Now, she would not be silent in the face of any threat to Israel or to Jews anywhere else in the world. The Six-Day War in June 1967 was a momentous event in our family. We lived close to the school, and I was allowed to come home to eat lunch. We had a big radio on the kitchen table, and my mother and I would listen to the news of the war. At the beginning of the war, we were naturally quite concerned, if not worried. Israel was vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Nasser promised to drive the Jews into the sea. In our family, we believed that he really meant it. Fearing the worst, many foreign nationals were being evacuated from Israel. Every day, we would listen to the radio, hoping to hear some encouraging reports. Then, the war started suddenly. The Arab countries were caught off guard, as was the rest of the world. Israel destroyed the Egyptian Air Force. Before the planes could take off, they were blown up. My mother took a bus one day in the middle of the war and went to Washington, D.C. to implore the American government to give all possible support to Israel. For my part, I wrote a letter to the President of the United States, urging him to do everything in his power to help Israel. I actually did get a letter from LBJ sometime later, but the war was already over. Israel destroyed the air force of the Syrians. The Syrians were perched on top of the Golan Heights, and from that vantage point would wreak havoc on the Jewish farming settlements below. In a daring move, the Israel Defense Forces stormed the Golan Heights and captured it in a decisive and, again, surprising victory. This gave the settlements of the Galilee a feeling of security that was unknown till this time. Now we were on top of the heights. In the south, Israeli tanks and air support drove Egyptian forces from the Sinai Peninsula, stopping at the Suez Canal. Pictures came back of footprints in the sand going in every direction. Piles of Egyptian army boots littered the desert floor. They abandoned them in order to run away faster in the sand as the Israeli forces steadily advanced. The Jordanians attacked and were repulsed. Following that, Israel advanced into the ancestral Jewish territories of Judea and Samaria. Nablus, Shechem, Bethlehem, and Hebron were now in Israeli hands. Then the unbelievable happened. Israeli soldiers took over the old city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. It was announced, "The Temple Mount is in our hands." This was clearly miraculous. On the day that Jerusalem was recaptured, my mother exclaimed, "They will never pick on us again." As for me, I decided that one day I would move to Israel. Chapter 11. Mother's Lessons. My mother used to say that in life you have to know what to keep and what to throw away. She would say, if you want it, pretend you have it already. She would say, don't take no for an answer. She would say that you need to work hard for your money, and when you get it, let it work for you. She would say that if you find one friend in life, that's a lot. She had a saying that if they need him, they will cut a convict down from the gallows. She liked to say that according to the shul in which you come, that is how you pray. She said that there are people who turn garbage into gold, and there are those who turn gold into garbage. She told us that busy people can always find a moment to do something for others, but lazy people don't even have the time to help themselves. And she said that the worst pain there can be is for a parent to lose a child. She told me once that if she had a chance to kill her tormentors, she would not, because she would not want to go down to their level. She would also spend a lot of time speaking to God in Polish, so I didn't understand what she was saying. I only knew that it was very personal. Chapter 12. Albert and Henry. Albert and Henry Post were my cousins, and we would see each other on Sunday afternoons when our parents were off from work. Their mother and father were Irving and Edna Post. I have mentioned them earlier. On one particular Sunday afternoon, we had all gathered together at the farm of Martin and Eva Lubitsky, who lived in Colchester, Connecticut. They ran a farm that produced chickens. For a young boy, as I was, it was a very interesting place. On the farm there was a big, long wooden building, the chicken coop, where, naturally, the chickens were raised. A long driveway led from the entrance of the property to the back of the coop. The coop was on the left as you drove in, past the residence, which was an old farmhouse where the family lived. The landscape was kind of strange. It seems that whoever designed the place didn't do much landscaping at all. The house seems to have been built on the existing hill as it was by the side of the road. There was a front door, the way that I remember it, which it seems no one ever used. It was true that the mailman dropped off the mail there, but the house was built so close to the road that it was impossible to park there. The kitchen, where most of the activity in the house took place, had a long, steep flight of wooden stairs leading down to that ever-present driveway, which literally cut the entire property in half. That was a really scary flight of stairs, going up and going down. I am actually amazed that I remember it to this day. At the foot of this stairway, there was a little driveway going to a garage on a 90-degree angle to the main driveway, which was, by the way, unpaved. To the right of the main drive was a big yard for kids to run around in and for our parents to park their cars. After that yard and across from the chicken coop, there was an uncultivated field where you could pick milkweed at the right season of the year. I did this once. and I took some home with me and left it in the car. The next day, the milkweed opened up as my father was driving home from work. He opened the car windows to let in some fresh air, when all of a sudden the car's interior was filled with flying milkweed spores. He told me about it. He was smiling about it. He was not mad at all about it. But he cleaned it up and threw everything out. Martin and Eva Libitsky had 3 children. A boy named Richard, who now goes by the name Moses, which I quite like, not that he asked me. They also had 2 daughters, Anne and Ellie. Well, Moses is and was a really smart guy. This is what he did to become smart. He had a bedroom upstairs in the farmhouse in which there was a bed and a desk. A traveling salesman apparently came along selling encyclopedias, and his father bought the set. Well, that set went right up to Moses' room, and he read every single volume from cover to cover. He apparently became a very successful man out in California. Back to the story. Anne, the second child of the Libitsky family, was and probably still is a really kind person, although shame on me, I haven't been in touch with her in years and years. Ellie was in my class in school, and let me tell you for a fact, she was absolutely the most beautiful girl you ever laid eyes on. I didn't even bother to have a crush on her, because her natural beauty was so intimidating. Still, she was not a snob at all. I was just petrified to talk to someone so perfect looking. Back to the story. I remember so much about that place. Their farm bordered on a sand and gravel pit. This was a place where builders would just dig into the ground and excavate sand for building purposes, mostly concrete and asphalt, I would guess. But the gravel pits were fascinating. You could climb up the steep sides of the pit, and if you fell, it was soft sand, so you didn't get hurt. There were rows of holes near the top, and that was where birds dug holes for their nests. It sure was a wonderful place, that farm. The story that I most remember, though, is the story with Albert and Henry. They had somehow gotten hold of a Daisy BB gun, which is a type of an air rifle that shoots little copper balls out of the muzzle. They were taking shots at an empty beer bottle which was perched on top of a log. They kept at it for a long time, perhaps an hour. Once in a while you could hear a ding, as a BB did actually hit the bottle. It was also possible to hear their shouts of frustration as the bottle would not break. Albert was real big. He was like a man, maybe 16 years old at the time, and Henry was 14 or 15 years old. As a 6-year-old, I was way below their league. I knew it. They knew it. However, the thought of shooting at the beer bottle was so intriguing to me that I kept begging them to let me try. Henry chased me away time after time, but I kept coming back, asking Albert to let me have a turn at it. Finally, Albert reluctantly gave in, persuading Henry that if they just let me have one try, I would go away and stop bothering them. At last I held the rifle in my hands. Albert explained to me, as a true expert in firearms would, which hand goes where and which finger pulls the trigger, and how to aim. I added something of my own to his instructions. This is something which I find very helpful and useful to this day in many real-life situations. I stretched out my arm towards the bottle and pointed my finger at it with deliberation. Then I held the rifle in the same position as if I was pointing with the gun, and I pulled the trigger. Pow! The bottle exploded on my very first shot. Albert looked at Henry. Henry looked at Albert. They looked at me with amazement and maybe even with respect. Then Henry told Albert to give me another try. I was not able to repeat the performance, but it certainly was an experience that I will never forget. The takeaway for me from this is that before doing something which involves the determination of a precise location and interception of objects or locations in space, it is important to physically point at the object or the place that you want to intercept or get to. Let us just rephrase this as orientation and mobility. This technique is very helpful for me on a daily basis. It is something I will do while going up or down steps, crossing the street, or walking on the sidewalk. It is amazing to me that at the age of 6, I was able to discover this independently. So, although most people would have thought that the value of this story was in the fact that a little boy broke a beer bottle on his first attempt, that is not the way I would view it. The value herein lies in how that little boy did it. The truth was that the pointing orientation technique was and is one of the most valuable tricks I have ever learned. Moreover, it was not taught to me by anybody. By the way, this is used by railway workers on the high-speed bullet train that goes from Tokyo to Osaka in Japan. It is also a technique which is used in Cheder, Jewish elementary education, where students are typically instructed to place their finger on the letters of the words as they read them. Irving and Edna have gone on to their eternal rest, as has Henry. May their names and their memories be a blessing. Albert is still very much with us, and from what I understand, is a strong gun enthusiast. Martin Libitsky has passed on, and I miss his sense of humor. All the rest of the Libitskys are still here at this writing, and may the Almighty watch over them and keep them well.